Well, I'd have to think that after Elijah's victory at Mount Carmel, 450 prophets of Baal biting the dust, Elijah mocking Baal, God showing up, sending fire from heaven, the people turning their hearts back to God, crying out, Yahweh, He is God. This has got to make us feel about as good as we have felt in a long, long time in the story of the Bible. I mean, Israel, the northern kingdom, has been a complete mess ever since since it started, since the kingdom divided. Jeroboam led the people to worship the calves. It's all been bad, leading to bad, with Ahab, the worst king of them all. But in that day, in this dark moment, God shows up through this man, through his prophet, Elijah, a hero, a guy like Moses, who is a man of courage, standing against all odds, against all the people. And God does something miraculous in response to his prayers, shows up, shows the people believe, it seems like. I mean, this is awesome. This is what we've been waiting for. Maybe there's some hope in the northern kingdom. Right? Maybe Israel, even though it's been so bad in the past, maybe things are going to turn the corner. The kingship is falling, but the prophets are rising. I mean, this is what we've been seeing. And you got to think Elijah is like full of optimism, right? I mean, he just saw God do amazing things. And then he prays, and God even sends the rain for the first time in a couple of years on Israel. God's going to start bringing life back in Israel, right? Then you come to 1 Kings chapter 19. Ahab goes home, not happy. He tells Jezebel, remember the wicked bad lady that he married? He tells Jezebel everything that Elijah had done. Hey, honey, all those prophets of Baal, because remember, Jezebel was the Baal worshiper who brought in the worship of Baal into Israel. Says, hey, honey, things didn't go well today. All your prophets were killed out there by Elijah. What does Jezebel do? She says, listen, you go. I want you to go tell Elijah, may the gods do to me, and more also if I don't take your life tomorrow. And you got to think, I mean, Elijah's not going to care about that. I mean, he just stood all alone against 450 prophets of Baal in front of all the people, a man of courage. He's not going to listen to some threat from Jezebel, especially not when she's saying, may the gods do this to me. I mean, he knows all the other gods are false gods. They don't do anything for you. They have no power. It was the whole point of the Baal thing, right? Oh, maybe Baal's out there sleeping. Maybe he's going to the bathroom. And he mocked Baal. He knew there was no power. No one answered. No one did anything. Remember all that stuff. Surely he's not going to listen to her, right? Then 1 Kings 19, verse 3. How does he respond? Then Elijah was afraid. No way. Afraid of her. After all this, afraid of what she could do. And he gets up and he runs for his life. I mean, think of that. Even the prophet, I mean, this guy was like a hero. But maybe he's a little bit too much like us too. Great victory. And then he gets afraid and he runs. And he runs for his life. And then he goes out into the wilderness and he gets under a tree and he prays and he asks God if he could die. And he says, it's enough, Lord. Just take away my life. I'm no better than my father's. You expect that from the man of God, the prophet of great courage, to within a couple days be under a tree crying out, oh God, just take my life away from me. I'm no better than anybody else. No better than my father's. My life is useless. Nothing's happening. I mean, you got to think of how discouraged he is. Maybe he's disappointed in himself for running. We don't know. But I think he's certainly disappointed that as he realizes that, you know what, maybe even in spite of all of that good stuff that happened at Mount Carmel, maybe there's not really going to be change in Israel. Maybe my work's really not going to accomplish very much. I thought you were showing up. I had expectations about what you were going to do with me, with the people, and it's not happening. I see it now. It's not going to happen. And he just feels like, I just want to die. And this is a guy with a nature like ours who can have huge victories one moment and be terribly depressed a few days later. Well, what does God do when he sees his man suffering, but he sees his man sulking, sad, depressed, frustrated? God sends out an angel to Elijah to help him and to feed him. Elijah goes back to sleep, does it again. And then Elijah he goes down a long journey all the way to a mountain called Horeb. Remember that one? Elijah goes to Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai. Remember the place where the great prophet Moses first encountered God at the burning bush, the place where God revealed himself and gave his law, the place where Moses himself was struggling to understand God and God's ways. Do you remember that? How Moses cried out to God at that mountain, Lord, show me your glory. Show me your ways. I don't understand you. Elijah goes all the way there, perhaps because he wants to see the same things. He needs to understand God. He's realizing he doesn't have his mind around what God is doing or who God is. Maybe God will show him and help him to understand down here at the mountain, the mount called Horeb. Well, Elijah gets there, and God does come. God does come after his struggling man. And God starts to talk with Elijah, and he asks him, what are you doing here, Elijah? I mean, I think maybe the implication, shouldn't you be back up with the people? What are you doing all the way down here? And Elijah says, 1 Kings 19, verse 10, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. The people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars. They've killed your prophets with the sword, and I'm the only one left, and they're trying to take my life too. I doubt we've ever felt quite that alone, but he's just honest with God. This is what's going on in his heart. And so God says, go out and stand on the mountain before me. And 1 Kings 19 verse 11 says, and behold, the Lord passed by, which is the same thing that it says back in Exodus when God showed up and revealed himself to Moses. Remember, he passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious. This time, God's not going to pass by and speak words, but he's going to reveal himself to Elijah and to us through some pictures or through some events that happen on the mountain just for Elijah to see, but we get to read about it. The Lord passes by on the mountain, and then a great and strong wind tears up the mountain and breaks the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But then it says, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, and the mountain is shaking like it did when God gave the law on Mount Sinai. But the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was fire on the mountain, like the kind of fire that fell from heaven on Mount Carmel. Just a few days before, the fire came, but the Lord wasn't in the fire either. All of these climactic things, these powerful displays of God's power and presence, God wasn't in any of them. And then, what happens? Verse 12, and after the fire, there was the sound of just a low whisper, like a quiet voice. And when Elijah heard it, he came out, wrapped his face in his cloak, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And what's the point? I wonder what you think. I mean, this is the kind of thing you got to wrestle with. It's just a story. But it seems like Elijah was wanting more and more of the acts of power that seemed to turn the people back to God. And so God shows him, I could do the wind, and I could do the earthquakes, and I could do the fire. But that's not how I'm going to work. Not normally. I can. But God's in the voice. In the low whisper. God's not going to work the way that Elijah wants him to work. God's going to work through the through the word, through the quiet, normal way, speaking, maybe specifically through you, Elijah, through just speaking my words to the people. It's not going to be the show that gets all the people to turn to me. It's going to be through the word. And then God speaks to Elijah again and says, what are you doing here? And you know what Elijah says? After that incredible object lesson, he says the exact same thing. He said, I've been jealous. They're so bad. They kill everybody. They're trying to kill me. I'm the only one left. Like God's done all this, and it's like Elijah doesn't seem to get it. But God still cares about Elijah in spite of all of these struggles. And so God tells him, listen, Elijah, I want you to go and I want you to anoint this guy Jehu. He's going to become the new king over Israel, getting rid of Ahab. And I want you to go find a man named Elisha. And you anoint him, and he's going to be with you. And Elisha is going to be the prophet to come after you. I'm going to give you some help. But then God closes what he says to Elijah in verse 18, 1 Kings 19:18. And he says, listen, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that haven't bowed to Baal. Elijah, what's he been saying? I'm the only one left. He feels like there's not one other person in his entire country who cares about God. And God says, listen, there are 7,000 that I've kept for myself. I've kept a remnant, a piece of Israel faithful to me. Elijah, you're not the only one. I keep people for myself. Even in this dark time in Israel's history, God encourages him and says, look, I've still got 7,000 here who haven't bowed their knees to Baal. They're still mine. Well, Elijah gets up, and the first thing he does is he goes and he finds this guy Elisha. He just kind of throws his coat on Elisha, and Elisha's like, what's that? What's that all about? And then he realizes, wait, Elijah wants me to follow him. He's like saying, come and follow me without using any words. And so Elisha says, I just got to go home. I just got to tell my parents about this. And he goes home and he like kills his animals and sacrifices and gives away all the food. And then he runs after Elijah. And now Elijah's got somebody with him. So he doesn't have to go on all alone. And think of and when you step back just from this little story of Elijah, I wanted to take some time on it because I think it's revealing to us about ourselves. I think we probably identify pretty well with Elijah, the highs and the lows. But also I wanted us just to think about God. Think of how God keeps coming after Elijah. I mean, he was an amazing man, but he had his struggles. And God doesn't just let his man go. We saw the same thing with David, right? God went after him. And God goes after Elijah. God loves his children so much, he doesn't just let them go. Even when they're depressed, even when they feel like their life doesn't matter, like all they've been going after has been meaningless, God keeps coming after him, providing help for him, pursuing him. And then you think of what God showed on that mountain. When the Lord passed by, and instead of proclaiming words like he did to Moses, he proclaims through the pictures how he will work. God has the power to do great, amazing displays of his awesomeness, right? But that's not normally how God's going to work. God's going to work through the still, quiet whisper, through the word, through the ordinary, not so much through the extraordinary displays, but rather through, I think specifically, the faithful ministry of his prophets who just keep delivering the word to the people of God.